comedy, laughter, commentary on society. It is one of my favorite topics, period. Case closed. Comedy keeps us alive. It keeps us thinking. And today, my guest is Carol Montgomery, an original, funny woman who has been working in the field of comedy for a very long time. And she's got lots of insights, lots of fun quips that I'm sure are going to squeeze right into this episode as we keep talking about comedy, how it's been, where it's going, the state of comedy today. And there's certainly plenty of things we can keep laughing about. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you, honey. I'm so glad to reconnect with you. I'm so glad to be able, and of course, comedy is my favorite, one of my favorite topics. So it's comedy and my son. That's about it for me. So I'm thrilled that we can talk.
Now tell me, how did you find comedy to become a passion of yours?
Wow. Well, it started when I was very young. My dad, I always when people ask me about my early how it happened is my dad was a bartender. He was a high school teacher, but in the summertime he was a bartender in the Catskill Mountains, which is the Borscht Belt. And for your listeners, back in the 60s, that's where you saw comedy. There were no comedy clubs. There was no evening at the Improv. There was none of that. So people would go to the Borscht Belt. They'd spend their summers there, and they would have comedians coming in. So as a little girl, my father would be setting up the bar, and I'd be hanging out with him in the daytime. Rodney Dangerfield would walk in, Jackie Mason, Toady Fields. And Rodney Dangerfield back then was Jack Roy. He changed his name when he was what's it called when they put stuff up on the houses. But he was doing that, and he was selling that, like tiles and stuff. And he was doing stand up as a young man, and it was only until he changed his name to Rodney when he was much older is when he became successful. So I told my father years later, I was like, why did I become a comic? And then I was like, I said to my father, it's your fault. This is all your fault.
You took me to see the old school guys.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, I got to meet all of them. So, as a little girl, why wouldn't you want to go on stage?
Do you remember what your first show was, Carol?
As a young kid or as an actual stand-up?
Let's say your first one where you were entertaining your friends and neighbors.
Oh, well, actually, I do remember that one because I was doing summer stock in 1979. I was 21 years old. I was kind of lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was working at the time. I thought I was going to end up being like a set designer. And summer stock is very intense. You set up the show on Sunday, do the show, and then you break down the show the following Saturday to do the next show on Sunday. So we would, on breakdown days, we would drink a tad. We would be drinking a lot. And one of my friends said, you're really funny. You should be a comedian. And now this is how long ago. Like comedians weren't, it's not what it is now, obviously. So I was like, what's a comedian? Like the only thing I'd ever seen was The Tonight Show, with Johnny Carson. So my friend and I sat down and he said, we're going to write. So we wrote 5 minutes. And then we decided to have I forget why we were having a Christmas party in July. And they made me go on and they made me tell jokes. And it was it. That was it. When something clicks in your life, you go, that's what I'm supposed to do.
And that's interesting. Back in 1979, you had, Phyllis Diller, who's probably still alive, and Joan Rivers was the main female that, occasionally got to fill in for Johnny Carson.
Right. That was it. Those two. And like I mentioned Toady Fields a lot because she gets, because Joan and Phyllis were so big. But Toady was also out there doing her stuff, but not in that national like TV type of thing. Toady was just going out and working in the Catskills. So you could count how many female comics there were back in those days.
Now, when did you do your first professional show?
I went soon after I did summer stock. That fall. I was still living at home with my parents in Brooklyn, and there was a comedy club all the way down. Like I would literally take a bus from my parents' house to Sheepshead Bay. It was called Pips Comedy Club, and I started doing. Like I said, it's so different now. But back then, they had a audition night. So you'd pick a number, and you'd get to go on. And so that was my first big professional gig. And what's great about that, I love telling people the story, is there was a great comedian named Richie Jenny who passed away a while ago. But
I know.
Richie, okay, yes, of course you do. You would know Rich, of course. So Richard Jenny was on the same lineup, and a guy named Andrew Silverstein, who ends up becoming Andrew Dice Clay.
I know who that is too. Yep.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Wow. You had some tough competition on your lineup.
Yes, we did. Well, we were all terrible.
Jenny with the claws.
Yes, with the lobster claws. But we were all terrible. We were all so bad. And the thing about Richard, and I teach stand up also, and I also talk about it, and I do a bunch of other things besides doing stand up. And one of the things I say, because he's the perfect example of what a true comedian was. He was so bad. I am telling you, I was like, this guy is going nowhere. And he was just, I can't tell you how bad he was. And so we'd see each other at Pips, and then a couple of years go by, and now I'm trying to get into one of the clubs in the city, and I was at Catch a Rising Star, and I think I was going on late. I had one of the late newbie spots, and I walk into the club, and somebody is on stage, because they had, remember, the curtains, so you couldn't go in, and somebody is just killing, destroying, and I'm like, who the hell is that? And I walked in, and it was Richard Jenny, and I remember thinking, man, stand up, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later. Stand up is the only field that you can't fake. The only way you get good in stand up comedy is doing the time and getting on stage. And it worked, because he was horrible, and now he was brilliant.
That's such an interesting point, because our parallels with comedy and stand-up in particular are very similar. I went into my first club it would have been 1979 when I was 18. And, I'd go into the clubs and just watch everybody work their routines, watch everybody try to get better, whether it was, Jerry Seinfeld or Eddie Murphy or Richmond Irvini, who owned a couple of the clubs out there, and bring everybody on, and then you'd have Jackie Mason come on and show him how he was doing it, and it was just such a golden time of this birth. What was it like? I'm just curious, because frankly, I'm trying to think. If I go back to 79, there weren't that many females. By 84, when I moved to the city,
right.
You had Carol on stage a lot, and Joy Behar and Judy Gold. So you started to get more of, the women, yourself starting to get on the stages. But what was that first thing like? You said you were between Rich Jenny and Dice Clay. Right.
Well, especially at Pips, I said the thing about Pips, because, it was a very Italian neighborhood, they just wanted me to get off stage and make sauce. They did not care about what I was. And you remember, I was 22. I was this cute little thing. I had no idea what I was talking about. I just knew this was the path I was going to take. And, it's so... Back in the day, so they would give you a number. You would, because now the internet has changed all that. But, do you remember trying to get a ticket to a concert, and then you'd sit outside Ticketmaster and wait for it? Like, young people are like, what? You would sit outside? So it was the same thing for that. It was what it was is that they used to give out the numbers. Let's say it's 6:00, and this is all of them: comic strip, Catch, the Improv. But what would happen is, at that time, and I'm thinking about it, what you said, it was such a magical time. So many people wanted to do that. People would start lining up like earlier. So there was at one point you had to sit outside. I sat outside Catch a Rising Star at noon, waited 6 hours, and I was online with Rita Rudner, a young lady named Margaret Smith. And we just, we did what we had to do. I mean, the competition, it's so funny when you look at your life, and then you look back at that time, and, they still do this with women anyway. They mean, there's nothing they like better than making women feel like they have to compete against each other. You see that with the Real Housewives and all that stuff. But back then, because there were only maybe a dozen of us, and they would only put one woman on occasionally, there was a lot of animosity amongst the women now, because they were like, well, I can't be friendly with you because you're going to get my spot. And now it's so funny, because now it's like they were just, they were so terrified of putting two women on a show. God forbid. So it's things have, things have changed, and then of course things haven't changed.
Well, if I go back to, let's say, 86, Catch a Rising Star, Louis Ferranda, who I'm sure
Yep.
you know, was booking, or Dangerfields with Rick Messina was, handling that and a bunch of other clubs, and they kind of paced it. You had, the opening, the middle act, maybe.
Right.
So it was really only 1 to 3, excuse me, 3 to maybe 4 acts,
Right.
for the show.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And
when you think about it, they have to decide if it's only 3, there's going to be 2 boys or 2 girls, and one of the other.
right. Right.
Tough to
But they,
balance out. Were there more men at the time than women trying to get into comedy?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So many more men. And what's what's interesting now is because the last few classes I've taught, it's all been women. It's all been women. I mean, and like maybe one guy. So I don't know why that has changed, but maybe because women are starting to find their voices. I'm not really sure, but it is quite fascinating. But back then, and look, when you're a young man and you get the chance to work in a basically a nightclub with alcohol and hot young waitresses, why wouldn't you want to be a comedian?
Sounds like fun to me.
I mean, like,
And it was. There was a lot of fun nights then.
but it was like it's so fun because I remember like being on the road and there was one guy and people always say who was it, and I said I can't remember who it was, but he was sleeping with every waitress whatever comedy club was, wherever the city was, and every waitress would come up to me and go, "Do you know so and so?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. He's a good friend of mine." She goes, "He's my boyfriend." And like every single waitress in every city said the same thing. "He's my boyfriend." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." I wasn't gonna.
That gave you some good fodder for future routines.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Where did you find your inspiration from over the years? Where do you find it from?
Oh, you know, I'm a comic. Like I'm a comic in the vein I think of Carlin, and really more like Pryor, because Pryor spoke from his heart. So what was happening, he ends up talking about on stage. And so when I started, I was a baby. I was 21 years old. I was single. I was looking to date. So I talked about that, and then I met my husband, and I talked about my boyfriend, and then he became my husband, and then I got, and then I had my son, and so my life is always about what happens in my real life. And recently, because I'm older, I had an incident. This really did happen. I had an incident. I'd gone to a concert, and I have high blood pressure, and it was a medical. I was fine, but it was in a medical emergency, and and as I'm sitting there and everything's going on, I look at my husband. I said, "This is going to be a great bit." And it is. It ends up being a great 5-minute bit. So that's always been my life. Whatever is going on in my life is what I talk about.
That's funny because I've been a writer my whole life. Definitely could not imagine doing stand-up. I admire the people who do any kind of stand-up tremendously. I think it's the toughest thing in the world. I really do.
Thank
Well,
you.
not the toughest thing in entertainment. In entertainment, we won't call it the toughest thing in the world. I admire those Top Gun fighter pilots a little more. But if we're talking about challenges in entertainment, especially, with the internet, and you do a routine, it goes viral online, and then you go to a club, somebody's looking for something different from you. So
Right.
you're constantly in a position you have to write. Just the other day, last night, I'm walking down the street. I get my best ideas to write just by standing at red lights, because someone will say something. There was
Right.
this woman screaming on her phone, and 2 guys are walking behind me, and they start laughing, and they say, the other day my wife says I need to show more of my emotions. I wonder what she would have thought about that scene if I acted that way.
Well, there's nothing like New York City. There's nothing like
Exactly.
picking up those little snippets.
Where do you grab I remember, Larry Amorose, who you might remember, used to put the stack of newspapers and he'd turn through the pages of newspapers and just randomly improv off whatever he was finding in the headlines. How do you build up that fodder to create a routine?
Well,
Obviously, you're saying from your life experience, you just had, but how else?
I mean, my husband. My husband is very funny, and I will say to him, I have this idea, and my husband's one of these people though, like he doesn't know how to stop. Like he's like a machine gun with ideas like, and he'll say something funny. I go, stop there, and then gives me
Is he
six
a
more.
comedian?
Huh?
Is he also a professional
No,
comedian?
no. He's a musician actually and a songwriter. So and he's so I mean he just was one. He would never be able to do stand up, because you have to have you have to have balls to be a stand up comic. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes I'll talk with him about it, or there's a few really trusted women that are comedians that I'll talk to about it. So it really is. I'm not, like I said, like, it's funny because my son's been dating this girl for a couple of years and they're probably going to get married and everything, but I have not delved into that yet.
Hmm.
Like, my son, who's a great sport, but like, I think it was the second TV special. My whole set was basically about him telling me that he didn't masturbate until he was older. Like, so, and all of his friends were in the audience and it went on national TV. But I haven't, like, as he's gotten older, I don't know if I'm trying to not push away, but like I'm trying to let him be his own guy. So not use his life as material. I'm sure once he's married and has children, of course, then there's a whole new branch of stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to a comedian one night who I know fairly well. I'll leave him nameless on this. And he starts talking about, his wife. I'm like, he's not married. I know he's not married. I'm like, did you get married? And he said, no, but it's a good routine. I have to change up whether it's my girlfriend or my wife, depending on the crowd.
Wow. Yeah, no, I know people that do that. I have a friend of mine whose parents, she has probably 20 minutes on her parents, and they passed away years ago, and she still does it. You know what I mean? If it's a good, a real comic will say, if it's a good joke, I'm doing the joke.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you go about building a set of, as in, we're not talking about physical sets, everybody. We're talking about your 15, 20, 30 hour long set where you're going to entertain people for that period of time. You have to be on stage.
Well, for me, I mean, I pretty much, which is surprising since I'm so much older now and my brain, synapses aren't as, sharp. But for me, I mean, we write it down. We write down. I'll give you a perfect example of this. So when we did the third Funny Women of a Certain Age special, we were supposed to shoot it in July, and then there was a COVID scare because it was right at the end of COVID. So we had to postpone it until I think we shot it in August. So I had another month to literally work on that particular 10 minutes. So I basically wrote it down and I would go to all the different clubs because, one of the things, because I've been doing it so long, I have the luxury of being able to call and go, I'm not looking to do spots every night. I need a spot now. You don't have to pay me the $25. I just need to do stand up. And most of the clubs were great. And I would run around and do as many spots as I could to tighten up that material. But that was for a 10-minute set. Most of it's in my brain. I have it written down. But like my friend Leanne Lord, who was on my third special, she has actually like 2 or 3 loose leaves of alphabetized jokes. I'm like, you're out of your mind. I said, when this brain goes, all my material's gone. Do you know what I mean? Like everyone has their own way, but if I'm working on something, going back to that third special, like during COVID, all of us were just everyone was so shell shocked because they're like, what are we going to do? And my husband actually said, at some point, stop eating the giant pizza we just made and go out and start writing new material because at some point you're going to it's going to come back. So thank goodness he said that because and then all of a sudden we were like, oh, we have the deal for the next special. I was like, so yeah, so it's a matter of going, you have to go out every night. If you're working on, especially television, it's different if you're just going out to do sets, but if you're doing TV, you need to know you have to do this at this amount of time. So that's what I would do.
Now, before we talk about Funny Women, and I really want to drill down how that became your vision and how you put this together and imagine it, but I want to ask you a question first. You've worked on a routine. You need to test it out. You need to work it out. You need to find where it fits and where it doesn't.
Right.
What does that feel like when you step on stage knowing it's not fully baked?
well, okay. Remember, I've been in this business now, my goodness gracious, a long time, like 47 years or something. So it's if it's not fully baked, then I know I have to work on it. I
Mm-hmm.
have to make sure that it's, if that joke didn't land the way it should have landed, then I'm like, okay, what did I say that didn't land? Or at my level, I'm sorry, I know this sounds very conceited, but if the joke didn't land, it's not my fault. Like if
Mm-hmm.
I've worked on a bit and it's not landing and then I'm like, okay, it's the audience. But I will tell you, speaking of all this stuff, so I keep going back to the third special, but so I had done everything I just said. I'd gone out, I had nailed it, I had nailed it. This set was, in my own words, it was spectacular. Knew it was going to do well. So, third special. I'm on stage. I'm doing it. Comics will tell you of this feeling that when it's a really good set, you literally get out of your body and you watch. You're watching yourself. So I'm like, this is great. And while this is happening, to the right of me, I see like hands going like this. And you do one of these because you're so focused. And I look over and I'm like, why is my director, because remember, I'm one of the producers too. I'm like, why is my director doing this? And like, she wouldn't stop. And I'm doing my stuff and I'm destroying. I mean, like, I'm not one of those comics that say that. I will only say it and I finally stop what I'm doing. I'm like, what do you want? And she walks out on stage and goes, the light blew out behind you. One of the lights. We have to reshoot it. And I look at her, and this is in front of a live audience. And I go, okay, from here? She goes, no, we have to do the entire set over. And
Oh
I was,
my gosh.
yeah. And I literally stood there, and now I've got 400 people who have come to see my show. And I'm like, I took a deep breath and I went, okay. And I went into autopilot. I looked at the audience. She left. I said, okay, folks, this is live television. We're going to have to do the whole set over. And everyone groaned because they were like, and there were so many comedians that night. There were so many women comedians that came to see the show and they were all like, no. And I said, here's what you need to do. I said, you're going to have to, you saw half of this. So you're going to have to act as if you never saw this before. And if you don't, I'm going to personally come out and kill every single one of you. And you know what? If you watch that special, you would never have known that we had that blip. So that has to do with, like you said, I knew the material was so good, but also in a situation like that, and that I'm very proud of the fact that that's over 40 years of knowing what you're doing. A younger comic would have just crumbled.
You reminded me of one of my worst moments of recording this podcast. MSNBC was doing a large event at Manhattan Center, and they asked if I would interview Luke Russer. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I would love to interview Luke Russer. This is going to be fun. And this interview goes amazing. He had told me he only had 30 minutes. At the 30-minute mark, right in the middle of the interview, I say, listen, I know I have to respect your time. He goes, this is going so well. Let's just keep going to the full 50-minute mark. Great. We go. And Carol, I go to say, okay, we're going to move over to the green room and, please hit subscribe. And I realize I have forgotten to hit record. Kind of like that light blowing out. All you can do is own it. And I say, Luke, this. And he goes, this was just such a great interview. I'm like, yeah, it was. And you know what? I didn't record it. And he just kind of looked at me and he laughed. I said, but I could cram out another one in the next 40 minutes if you can get the time. And he was such a good sport. We redid it in the next 40 minutes, but he, showed up as the professional. I showed up as the humiliated, relatively new person on the set. But he just came back with the full set of energy. And I will be forever grateful to that. And just like you had that audience, you brought that energy back. You knew how to bring them right in again. That's a pro.
Thank you. But I mean, that's one of my proudest moments because it really is. It's like, and on different levels, like once again, it's my show. I'm producing this. I've got the other women. I was on second. So the other women are going, what is happening? Like they're why. And here's the funniest thing about all of this. When I went back into the green room, when I was done, all the women were in the green room going, I am so glad that wasn't me. They were all like, "Oh my God, thank God that wasn't me." But yeah, I mean, what do you do? I always say that, like it's especially now because I'm older and sometimes I flub stuff and I literally just go to the audience, "Hey, I'm 68 years old. I'm barely able to remember where I am now. Give me a break." And they do because once again, like you said, you own it.
Yeah.
If you own it, and if somebody doesn't want to give you the courtesy to go, you owned it. Well, then that's on there. You know what I mean? Go out and own it, man.
You
Every
know,
time.
there's so much truth in that in anything you do in life. But, and we're going to come back to that because I'm sure you teach that in the teaching you do, but I don't want to go to the teaching. First, let's talk about Funny Women. How did this become an idea? How did it unfold? That was a big production you created, and you've done a few of them.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've been doing stand up since I'm 21 years old. And I had moved to LA, did all the TV stuff, moved to Vegas, was there for 10 years doing production shows. When I came back to New York City, I think I turned 40 at that point, but I was a road comic for years. Like I was on the road 3 weeks every month, and all of a sudden the internet. This the people for people like us. We've been around. We've seen. So the internet changed everything. And look, I think there's some great things about the internet, but when it comes to comedy, now all of a sudden people didn't care if you were funny. They wanted to know how many followers you had. And this goes back to Twitter. This isn't even now with TikTok and Instagram and all that crap. So I was like, what's going on? I couldn't get any road work. So I started, I was teaching and doing other things and directing and all that stuff. And I was doing a podcast just similar to what we were doing, but it was live and we were at someone's basement. I don't remember who the people were even, but it was all women. And of course, because it's an all female comedy, there's food. We're going, oh, your hair looks good. We're doing what women do. And we were having such a great time. I remember I was on the phone with my husband. I was walking home and I said, I think there should be a show just with all female comics, older female comics, because all of my friends are older now. And he goes, that's the greatest idea you've ever had. Because as you know, in our business, you throw enough stuff on the wall, something's going to hit.
Yeah.
And it snowballed. It literally, like I tell people this because they go, how did this happen? You got lucky. I said, no, I didn't. It was, first of all, it was not luck. It was a lot of hard work, but it was also right place, right time. Think about it. So we got our deal.
And you were the one who did the work to put it together. So
absolutely, I did.
All over the place. Not everyone takes the initiative to
right.
Put it together, do the work, make the connections, make the pitch, raise the money, and everything else. So don't ever.
Thank you. But like it is funny because there have been many women that come up and go, I had a similar idea. I said, yeah, you did, but
you had an idea.
You had an idea. I remember those early days of Funny Women that I was looking at clubs and looking at theaters, and I was up every morning at 8 o'clock on my computer till like 2 p.m. doing stuff. And one of my friends was doing a festival called the Cinder Block Comedy Festival. And she said, why don't you premiere the show there? And I said, great idea. We had a young girl, we had a millennial be the host as a joke. Judy Gold was on that. Janine Garofalo was on that. We had some really nice names. And one of the girls that was working like as an usher said, I work at a theater down on the Lower East Side. He goes, I think my boss would love this. And so that became the 6-year residency at the Crane. And when we were at the Crane, we did a showcase because a friend of mine said to me, you should do this for TV. This should be a TV show. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. And so we ended up pitching we had a big showcase and all the networks came, and Showtime, we had met with Showtime. The showcase was, I think, in February. We met with Showtime like just before Thanksgiving the year before. And they were the gentleman that ends up greenlighting the show. He was gung ho, but then, that's his job. He has to convince the network. So when we did the showcase, and the showcase was one of those things, I didn't tell the girls that there was anybody there. And it was a packed house. And so because what happens is, and I've done this too, when you know that there's somebody important in the show watching, you don't do your best work. So none of them knew. And after the show, we kind of had a little kind of a bidding war because Showtime was there, Amazon, HBO, CN. I mean, we had everybody there. And we ended up going with Showtime because Showtime gave me my first TV spot when I was a young comic. So I was like, I want to be loyal. And that's how it happened. And what I say to people is it happened fast. That never happens in show business. It happened. I came up with the idea. We had a deal probably a year later, which is unheard of. It just, like I said, right place, right time. That was during the Me Too movement. There was a lot more, trying to see what women have to say. So it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect.
Wow, that's fantastic. Or do you have another one planned?
Well, interesting that you asked that. What's happened now is, and it's funny because I've seen this happen so many times in my business. We're at a very strange time, and people in our business are afraid to do anything right now because it's a very nobody knows what's really happening in the world, so everyone's kind of on like eggshells. So Showtime was bought by Paramount Plus. Paramount Plus has basically put the kibosh on comedy specials. So Showtime hasn't done a special probably since around the time we did our third special. So we're kind of in limbo in the sense that we still, obviously there's older women. So we're in the processes of reworking and rebranding the show, and we're going to try to go out and repitch it to newer networks. Because one of the biggest things that a lot of the networks say, and I understand this, is like, well, we've already done funny women of a certain age. I'm like, well, yeah, but so I'm trying to see, do I want to do it? It's the same show, but maybe if I put a different name on it, it'll be the same show. But you know what I mean? Like, so me and my partner are just trying to figure out where exactly we're going to do it. But I have no doubt, because we're kind of in the same situation as we were during that whole Me Too time, and there's all this women's empowerment rising up. So I'm sure we'll get another deal. I just don't know when or where it's going to be.
And not only that, I'm sure the routines will be different than they were the first, second, or third time.
Absolutely. I mean, and what's interesting is when I originally came up with the idea, it was going to be only women over 50. So we had probably, give or take, 50, maybe 100 women. And then I said, really, in Hollywood, once you turn 40, you're dead to, the male executives. So I opened it up to that. And now I have thousands of women that I can use. So this should be this should be like a weekly series, like Evening at the Improv was. Do you remember that show where every week they had that? That's what it should be, because we will not run out of women that we can use to showcase.
Now tell me about you. You said you teach. What does that look like? Is it a lot of improv? What kind of people come to learn comedy from you?
Well, what happened was, like I said, because I was trying to figure out what to do. And so I just started teaching and talking about comedy and everything. And it's basically, if somebody, if you want to, it's interesting is comics who are veterans or seasoned comics, they're like, I don't need any help. And it's like, they're the ones that need the most help. Do you know what I mean? Like, they could use a session with me and it would be easy because I'd be like, don't do this. And then they'd be like, right, because sometimes you need somebody to stand over here and say, it's not working. Even some of the bigger comics, like the bigger name comics, I could clean up their act like that, But just recently, there's every 2 years there's a thing called the Irma Bombeck's Writers Workshop, and I ended up teaching there, and it was such an amazing experience for me. Do you know what I mean? It was unbelievable. And from that, I said to some people, do you want to come at, we'll do some Zoom sessions. And everyone was like, yes. I think you muted.
I'm not surprised. What a treasure to be able to learn from you.
Well, thank you. I mean,
I've been through so many phases of comedy, and just, what you picked up by learning your own routines. And you can't help but not learn when you're sitting in a comedy club, watching a routine and of someone else who's on stage as you're waiting for your return, or you finished your set and you're winding down and you're just watching it. There's so much you observe of what's working, because you can watch that comedian, watch the responses, watch what they're doing when they're struggling, when they forgot what they wanted to say next. You're a veteran.
Yeah. Well, what's so funny is and sometimes it's not even a lot. Like when I directed Jim Florentine's solo show, and
Hmm.
we would fight over words. I'm saying drop that. Like drop the word the. He goes, why am I dropping it there? I said because the timing is wrong. The beat. And you know what? When we after push came to shove and he did it, and he came up to him and he said, "You were right." And like it's still, but comics are so we basically we're solo artists, so we do everything ourselves, and we think we're the greatest, and everything is. But you know what? Someone else who has an eye can really help you. And it's not a it's, but you have to have the emotional strength to deal with somebody going, that joke's not going to work this way. And, because they're our babies. The jokes are our babies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a writer, I know the first time I handed someone my first manuscript when I was, I don't know, 30 years old, and they gave it back to me, and they had used a red Sharpie. It was like they could have been at O.J. Simpson mopping up, the scene. It was terrible. I mean, I was so upset.
Right.
All my words had been deleted, but it was better. It was better. And you point out an interesting thing when you said removing the word the. And you think about song lyrics.
Right.
Someone's written a song, it's a hit song, and then you're looking at the lyrics, and you're saying, wow, that's really improper English.
Yeah.
But boy, it works perfectly in the song.
Yep. 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 I mean, I have a certain way I when I'm on stage. So when I'm like writing, because I'm trying to write a memoir because everyone's like, you have so many stories, you should try it. But I'm writing as me. Like I'm just like blah 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 blah. And you brought up threads before. Sometimes I post stuff because I like to just post and see what kind of reaction I get. And I forget that I'm talking in comedian shorthand. So people, because the internet, if 100 people like it, one person's going, "Why did you say that the sky was blue? It was actually light blue with a gray." Because everyone, the internet, everyone has to argue. But so I have to learn. I myself have to learn. I always talk in shorthand. I talk in comedian speak. So sometimes I'm like, maybe I don't have to write, maybe I have to actually explain what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, these conversations always go way too fast.
Yes,
I've
they
been
do.
speaking with Carol Montgomery. Carol, parting words for everybody.
You know what? When it comes to being older and life, don't take anything personal. Don't take anything personal. That's my at this point in your life, just live and love and enjoy what you're doing and laugh and go out, and please go out, whether it's my show or another comedian, go see comedy because we need it more than ever. And laughter, it's cliche, but laughter's the best medicine.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. Comedy and then magic are two things I want more in my life. There's never enough. And they always just make us think, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
You're the art form that makes us think.
Yep.
Better than anything else.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really do mean that. So, okay, everybody, I've been with Carol Montgomery. She's the creator, the producer of Funny Women. She's done lots of stuff. She teaches, she coaches, she helps comedians. She's on stage herself. She encourages the art form, and I highly recommend you follow her. There will be links below so you can do that. And Carol, thank you so much for joining me.
That was great. Anytime you want to do a part 2 in the future, I would love it.
I'm already envisioning part 2. I am already envisioning it because I can think of the topics we didn't get to.
Right? Yes, I agree.
Stay on, Carol. We are moving over to the green room. This has been the Silver Dispedience Perception Dynamics podcast. I'm Diane Rossell, the host. I want you to hit subscribe. I want you to follow Carol on any links she shares with me. Please do that. And share this with your friends because this has been a fun episode. And it's good for anybody who's thinking about a career in entertainment, a career in comedy, just plain thinking about improv and having the guts to step into the stage of life. So thank you very much, Carol.
Thanks. I had a great time.